So you already know who I am, but I'm Allie. And I grew up in a house with multiple worlds. It was the type of place where you could move from room to room by climbing through 18th century crawl spaces, or walk from the beginning of an orchard and not know where your trees ended and somebody else's began. It was the type of place where sisters talked to ghosts and brothers still played pretend. And actually, we used to play pretend every day. And I would lead my 4 siblings through new worlds, and they'd just follow me with trust. And I knew that they would be there no matter where I took them and no matter where we went. But I remember the last time that I moved through a world from world to world with ease. And it was a day where we ended our game by sitting on the roof of a root cellar that was on our property. It was built into the side of the hill, and the way that the sun hit it, the grass on the roof was always green and bright and dry and warm. But right down below, like half a story below, the sun never got there, and it was always this dark, wet, sort of damp space. And we used to talk all the time about jumping. Like, we would sit there and dangle our feet over the edge and say, we're gonna jump. And we never did. And this one day, we're sitting over the edge, and I decide today's the day we're gonna jump. And I jumped, and I looked up, and I couldn't see my siblings. The way that the light was hitting the roof, it was like they were invisible. And for the first time, I had gone somewhere, and they hadn't been able to follow me. I had moved from one world, from the world of the light into the world of the darkness, and they couldn't come with me. And in many ways, I've spent the last 2 decades living just in those 2 worlds, in the world of light and in the world of dark, in the world of health, in the world of sickness. And when I'm in one of those worlds, I cannot access the other one. When I'm healthy, I cannot remember what it's like to be sick. When I'm sick, I cannot remember what it's like to be healthy. When I'm healthy, I am only doing things that make myself get sick. And when I'm sick, I can't remember the things that I love to do when I'm healthy. And I'm on this weird quest to try and find out how I can move through worlds again. And I haven't been able to find the holes or the paths like I used to be able to find them. And I think the closest that I've ever gotten is by coming together with people who know those 2 worlds, who know the world of the sick and who know the world of the healthy as intimately as I do. And you're gonna hear stories from those people tonight. So thank you.
So I woke up lying in a pool of orange Gatorade, lying on the kitchen floor. Couldn't really remember how I got there. Apparently I'd passed out. Couldn't remember who I was, what was going on. My blood sugar was really low. My brain was screaming at me, drink more juice. I looked up from the floor at the refrigerator, only 5 feet away, but it felt like climbing a mountain in the winter in flip-flops. I looked over, my beagle was staring at me, Jackson, looking at me quizzically, and I thought, if I died, would you eat me? I got up to the refrigerator, I got some juice, I recovered. But I thought, recovered into what kind of life? I felt like it was the end of an era. I couldn't live alone anymore. I couldn't live that independent lifestyle I was used to. What if this happened again? What if I had hit my head on the counter as I passed out? I knew something had to change. I didn't want my dog to eat me. So I knew I had to start a journey to redefining myself. About a year later, my friend Sari, she contacted me, she reached out. I'd known Sari since college, we were good friends. She has Lyme disease. I didn't know how bad it had gotten. Turns out Sari was dying. I mean, she was really dying. She was in the hospital, preparing for the end. She reached out to me as someone she could talk to about how to die a good death, someone to be there for her in the end. It wasn't just the Lyme disease. She had these secondary infections that the doctors couldn't really identify. Honestly, they weren't really trying that hard. Sometimes doctors are not our best friends. We had these amazing series of conversations over the next few days and weeks about sickness, about death, about friendship, how to relate to people. She didn't want me to comfort her, to fix things. She just wanted me to be there with her. And I wanted to be there with her too. I started to think after these conversations that, I needed someone like that in my life. I needed people who would be there for me when I was sick and maybe when I'm dying. Something we all maybe need. When I moved to Hartford this past summer, I was determined I was going to make these kind of friends. I was going to have the friends who knew me as someone who had a chronic illness, who would be there with me when I needed them. And so I would go there right up to people. I'd stick my hand out and say, "Hi, my name is Justin. I have a chronic illness. You might have to save my life." And I'm a teacher, and so I get in front of my students, and I'd say, "Hi, my name is Professor Fifield. I have a chronic illness. You might have to save my life." I really did that. So a few weeks ago, I was hosting a potluck at my house in Hartford. And I was going around making sure everyone had a full drink and enough to eat and was having a good time. And so I sat down, and then I started to feel something. It started happening again. I started feeling drunk, but I wasn't really drunk. My mind started to cloud up. My senses started to dull, started to feel dizzy. So I somehow staggered my way into the kitchen to get some juice. My friend Allison, who I'd met only a few months before, she saw me. She saw the look on my face. She saw what was going on. So she followed me into the kitchen. By that time, I was in the bedroom right off the kitchen, sitting on the edge of the bed. I was clutching a bottle of orange juice to my chest, just kind of looking down like this, just trying not to pass out. She sat down next to me. She turned to me. She said, "Are you okay?" I somehow mumbled, just sit there. Just sit. I just wanted her to be there. And she was. She was there with me, and eventually I recovered, felt better, rejoined the party, and I felt like myself again, felt like me. But it was a new me though. It was a me that wasn't alone. Thank you.
So in honor of the Olympics, I thought I would tell you the story of my first Olympic coach, who ironically was also my grandparents' housekeeper. Now, the odd thing about that was that my family was not wealthy, and so the fact that we had housekeepers at all was kind of ironic. And the only thing that any of these housekeepers had in common with each other is that I never saw them clean a freaking thing. So my favorite of these housekeepers was Janice. Her real name was Mary, but she preferred to be called Janice, and we kind of gave that to her. Because in truth, she looked a lot like Janis Joplin. She had really kind of strawberry frizzy hair, and she wore these long, flowing, what my grandmother called hippie clothes. And she would sit on the back porch of my grandparents' house in their rocking chair and smoke cigarettes and sing Janis Joplin songs while my grandmother would clean the house. And so I would see her as I would come up the driveway, and before I could actually see the house, I could hear her through the leaves in the trees singing, "Try just a little bit harder." And so when Janice came, I went off to kindergarten. And every day I would learn how to sit politely within the confines of my carpet square, raise my hand and speak when I was spoken to. And then in the afternoons, I would hang out with Janis Joplin. It was kind of perfect. Janice taught me everything that a 6-year-old should know in the 60s. She taught me that if you're gonna make a liquid come out of your nose, it should really be like ginger ale or beer or something that has a lot of bubbles. She taught me that you can walk a cat on a string in the same way you can walk a dog on a leash if you're willing to let the cat kind of walk behind you and then just tug at it every once in a while. The other thing Janice taught me was that sometimes a perfectly timed artificial fart under the arm can take the place of 1,000 words. And so we went through this, and every day I would hang out with Janice, and it was fabulous. And when February came, it came time for the Olympics. Now, the 1968 Olympics was all about Jean-Claude Keely and the way he could just rock that manly winter unitard. But for us, it was about the battle in the luge and the bobsled between the Italians and the Germans. And so when the Olympics was over, we were so distraught by this that Janice decided that in honor of the Olympics, we would create our own event. Now, we had been sliding down my grandparents' banister for many years at that point, but always kind of sitting up on our bottoms with our head up in the air. Janice taught us that if we strapped a big pillow around our chest, we could go down head first. And let me tell you, you don't lose any of the maneuverability and you gain enormous amounts of velocity. So my grandparents' banister was a very tough course. There was a giant slalom right at the front end. And then you came around this 180-degree hairpin turn, and then you dropped into a downhill section right onto the floor in the front foyer. Janice decided that we could create not just the luge, but if we put one of those giant industrial laundry baskets, the canvas kind, with the 4 little metal casters on the bottom, we could drop into the laundry basket, skid across the front hallway, thus creating a luge and a bobsled, which now my family fondly refers to as the luge bob. As my brother went up first, he strapped on the pillow, he came down, way too much speed, as my brothers always had way too much speed. Out of control, comes around the hairpin turn, careens off, smashes, feeling the agony of defeat, right into the plaster wall. He's out of the competition. My cousin comes up next, much slower. He makes it all the way down the giant slalom, around the hairpin turn. He makes it down the downhill section, but he then just lands in the laundry basket and kind of skids like 3 inches. So now it's my turn. And I know that it is up to me. If I want to win the gold, I'm going to have to just really rock this thing. So I strap on the pillow. I sit up on the banister. Janice is behind me. She gives me a little push. I come down that giant slalom. I'm barely hanging on through the 180-degree turn. I come down into the downhill. I land solidly into the laundry basket. I skid across the front hallway, out the front door, across the street, and stick the landing right on Mrs. Tilley's front lawn next to her frozen bird bath. Later that afternoon, I was awarded the gold medal, which was like a chocolate coin on the end of a repurposed cat leash. It was the proudest moment of my life. The spring came, we had a lot more adventures, and then one day I came home from school and my grandmother said, Janice is leaving. And I said, what do you mean she's leaving? And she said, she's going to live with her family. And I was really confused by this because I thought, where are her family? What do you mean she's going to live with her family? And I could tell by the look on my grandmother's face that it was really complicated. And so I didn't ask anything else. And the next morning, sure enough, Janice got down into the foyer. She had her bags packed. And I looked at her and I realized this was my best friend. And I just said, I just really wish you wouldn't go. And she looked down at me. And she stuck her hand in her shirt. She gave me an artificial fart under the arm. She got into my grandfather's car, and she drove away. It wasn't until years later that I realized Janice wasn't a housekeeper. None of them were housekeepers. Janice was actually a psychiatric patient at the state hospital where my grandfather worked. And a couple of months before she came to live with us, the nurses had said to my grandfather, she's really delusional. We think she needs more medication. Will you give her more medication? And my grandfather said, no. Nobody gets better from more medication. What she needs is to live in the community. She needs to remember what it means to be loved by a family and to love a family back. I don't know what became of Janice. I never saw her again. But I know that because of her, I became a musician and a mental health counselor and the youngest person to ever win a gold medal in the luge bob.
The notes are like a real bummer for live storytelling, but my brain is made of Swiss cheese, so you're just gonna have to deal with it. So my family, everyone in my family likes to think that they're like really good in a crisis situation, but other people don't always agree with us. We don't always like react in the most emotionally appropriate way for any given situation. So when I got a phone call at work from my mom, that my dad was sick and in the hospital, I was actually kind of relieved that I didn't have to work the next day and not really panicking as I drove my way through the tangle of parkways and interstates between us. My parents had recently relocated from northern New Jersey to the Lehigh Valley of Pennsylvania for retirement, and the timing of that would be that much more of a kick in the gut once I had found out what had happened. When I got to the hospital, my cousin took me to a what I thought was a surprisingly cozy waiting room. And only my mother was there, looking very eerily calm, like in a creepy way, not at all in a reassuring way. Always on brand and entirely inappropriate for this situation, my mother turned to me and in a very deadpan way said, "Your dad's dead, you know." The next day, we talked to the funeral director for what seemed like an eternity. But at the same time, it was kind of like peppered with laughs about this $600 carved wooden duck urn that had some sort of relevance to this weird inside joke in my family from the 70s. The funeral director was less amused by this than we were, as we discussed in detail what would happen to my father's body. He was an organ donor, so that would happen. Then he would be embalmed for a wake, and then he would be cremated, and then we talked about what would happen to his ashes. The next evening, and what felt like another eternity later, we had just finished a wildly unsatisfactory dinner at a strip mall pizzeria, and were walking to the car. It was an unseasonably warm night for November, and it had just rained, so there was that amazing smell of the rain on the pavement, and the light from the storefront signs reflected off the wet pavement in this really surreal way. And that was when my mother's phone rang. I could hear the funeral director on the other end sounding like an adult in a Peanuts cartoon. So I couldn't really understand what he was saying, but then I heard my mother say in this bone-chilling way, "What?" A few more minutes passed as he said something, and she hung up the phone, and she said, "Everything's fine, but they lost your dad's body." It turned out that there had been some sort of mix-up between the hospital and the organ donation people and the funeral home, and his status as an organ donor had been mistaken as somebody who was making a whole body donation. And it turned out that his body was halfway to Philadelphia before anyone realized. For once, my mother and my brother reacted in what seemed like a probably pretty appropriate way. My mother was crying in a way that I hadn't seen her do yet since she lost her husband. And my brother was furiously pacing around the parking lot screaming about murdering somebody. But me, I was laughing hysterically. And once I finally caught my breath, I was able to croak out, "I promise you this is going to be so funny someday." They didn't really agree with me. But my dad did make it back in time for the wake. And it was one of those situations where they did like kind of too good of a job embalming the body. So he didn't actually look dead. He had this weird smirk on his face, and it kind of seemed like he was just really playing this elaborate practical joke on us all. But it wasn't a practical joke. But the joke's on him, because now he lives in that wooden duck urn, and I still haven't stopped laughing about the time that they lost my dad's body.
First. So, Easter, 1962. I was 2.5 years old, going on 3. How many of you, well, I guess you probably all know traits of a 2.5-year-old. They're really confident, they don't lie, and they don't whisper. So I'm all dressed in my Easter Sunday finery. My mom was really into images. So it was white nylon socks with black patent leather plastic shoes that slipped everywhere, an itchy petticoat, a dress with a sash in the back, and a bow that you cannot crush, and then an Easter hat made out of plastic fake straw with artificial flowers and that elastic that cuts into your neck. And white gloves that itch also. So we're walking down the left side aisle of St. Joseph's Church in Enfield, Connecticut, and I see it at the front of the church. Oh, and we were not churchgoers. We were image people. And I see at the front of the church something that gets me really, really excited. It was a statue. I didn't know what a statue was, but I knew what a doll was. But I recognized it, and I did this. Who's that? The response was, backhand to the head. It's Jesus, you little shit, shut up. I realized my best friend had a name. I had known that person, that image, that likeness for a long time already. I don't know why, but we can clearly see that there was some abuse in this household, and maybe I needed some rescuing. Fast forward, I'm in school. I don't have a lot of friends, but I'm aware of what popular kids have and what makes them have friends. They have something really cool about their personality, or weird, and they have a community. So, fast forward again. I realize I kind of have those things now. I have something really weird about me, or cool. Because I grew up in abuse, my brain was really, really flexible. I learned to block out things that were bad so I could function in things that were good. And it worked really, really well in my childhood. And it's a really neat trick. Some people call it neuroplasticity, some people call it dissociation, some people call it creativity. The net was, I got to enjoy sports and art and be a student and grow up and not remember the abuse as a kid until I got older. Then the system started to fall apart. In college, I started having nightmares, scaring my roommates, scaring all my friends, losing weight, and it was no fun. Fast forward again, I have my own kids. They're going through developmental phases, and all of a sudden, all those techniques that were so creative don't work anymore. Because I realized that my kids' normal development and my abnormal development is letting me remember the horrors. And I started to cry, and cry, and cry, and cry, and cry, and cry. Yeah, I just didn't know what to do. I knew I was creative. I knew I had a plastic brain that could heal. Plastic? I don't know. Flexible, creative. But I was crying. So I was crying day and night. And one night I got up and my family was sound asleep, 3 kids sound asleep, husband sound asleep, cats and dogs sound asleep. And I'm on the oriental rug in the living room. And I'm lying with my face on the carpet and my knees tucked under me. And I'm saying, God, why? And I look up. You guys know about Casper the Friendly Ghost, translucent, white. Yeah, he's back again. So there's this little conversation that goes on without words, where I kind of go, who the hell are you? And the answer is, you know who I am. And he's standing in front of my upright mahogany piano, but I can see through him because he's translucent. And I said, what do I need to know? And he said, I've surrounded you with people who know my love. Follow them. Thank you.
So one day, my friend came to me and said that he had yet another thing I just had to try for my pain. He then told me about this Chinese medicine doctor that he had heard of that had these herbal tea bags. He said that a bunch of our other friends had tried them and that they all swore by it. So I asked him for the number, since at this point I was willing to try anything. You see, At this point, I was going on months of a horrible cluster headache cycle. I was on the 11th month of my year-long period, dealing with ovarian cysts rupturing. I had fibro flares. I had chronic migraines. I was dealing with, I was severely anemic. And then on top of all of this, my hemiplegic migraines had just come back. So when I say I was willing, I mean I was desperate for relief. So I got the number and I went and I called the guy. And the first thing he says to me is, "Who the hell gave you this number?" And so I tell him who it was and I explain, all the other patients of his that I know. And he's like, "I don't know any of them." So I'm like, oh great, I must have the wrong number. And then he asks me what I have. So I start listing off all my conditions and he tells me to meet him Saturday at noon, gives me an address, tells me to bring $200 in cash and a car. I live in New York City. I don't have that kind of cash laying around, let alone enough to rent a car. Luckily, my stepdad was in town visiting, and so he offered to bring the car and drive me there so I wouldn't have to go alone. I managed to scrape together the cash, and we arrive, and I'm looking around, I realized we're in the back alley of a Rite Aid in Queens. I'm just like, this cannot be the place. And then my cell phone starts ringing. I answer it, and this man says, "Is that you?" And then the back door to our car opens, and this old, frail-looking Asian man climbs in the back seat and says, "Drive." I kind of look at my stepdad, who at this point is so used to my weird little things that I try for my pain relief, that he just goes ahead and drives. Meanwhile, I'm sitting there thinking, holy crap, I am about to die. And so we start driving, and the man tells me to hand him the money and says that it's for a consultation fee. So I'm like, oh, okay, great. You're going to kill me, and I'm giving you $200. Lovely. And so he tells us to stop at Starbucks. He stops, looks inside, and says, "No, keep driving." Meanwhile, I'm sitting there thinking, no, can we please go inside where there's people and, witnesses? And so we keep driving. He sees a Subway, and he's like, go to the Subway. And so we get inside, and he tells us that he wants water now. And so we buy him water, and he's sitting there drinking it. And, I'm kind of looking at my stepdad, and he's like, I think everything's okay. Things seem good so far. And then the man reaches his hand out and touches my arm. And I just kind of sit there like, okay, this is normal. And he asks me about my cycle, and he's like, "Is everything okay?" And I'm like, "No, actually, it's not." And he's like, "Yeah, I can tell." Then he touches my face. I just kind of glance over at my stepdad, and he's like, "Yeah, this just got a little weird." And so he's like, sitting there, touching my face, feeling around. And then he asks me if I've ever had a heart condition. And I was like, "Yeah, why?" And he's like, "Well, there's some things between migraines and heart conditions and stuff. They can be related sometimes." And I'm just like, dude, I never tell anybody about my heart condition. How do you know this? And so then he asks for my credit card number and explains that I will be getting these bags in the mail. I'm to take 2 a day, and it's going to cost about $400 for the month. And I'm just like, you've got to be kidding me. But I give him the card number anyways. And then about a week later, this box comes from Chinatown. And so I take it inside, and I open it up, and I pull out these bags expecting tea, but it looks more like shit. And I'm sitting there thinking, this can't be real. But I open it up, and I take the tiniest sip and spit it everywhere. And so I'm just like, you've got to be kidding me, but everyone swears this works. So I drink it, and I keep taking it every day. And after a couple weeks, surprisingly, my symptoms subsided. And so about a month or so later, I couldn't afford the bags anymore, or at least not twice a day. And so I switched to once a day, and almost immediately my symptoms came back. And I was like, there's no way it's these bags. It has to be stress. It has to be school starting, stuff like that. It can't be the bags. And then a couple months later, I couldn't afford the bags at all. 2 months later, I ended up in the hospital being told that I had a blood clot. I was at risk for a heart attack, and, I could die. And so I was like, I don't know what is in these bags. I don't know why this is working, but this shit works.
Dear Aaron, please don't take my presence personally. Like you, I'm not entirely sure how we were introduced or why, and frankly, it's kind of horrifying to know I'll never leave you. I'd really rather not be trapped inside your body for the rest of your life. It would be nice to get out and see the world. At least you have that. You have your eyes. No, I mean really, I'm in here. I'm in your nerves and your muscles and your neurons and your bones, and it's tiring. I'd like a break sometime. I'm sure you feel the same. I know because I'm always in here that I pull you down. I slow you down. I make you hurt. I make you anxious. Because of you, because of me, you make 10,000 to-do lists and lose all of them. Or you forget you've even written them in the first place. I make you feel like 5 minutes have passed when really it's been more like 50. And I hear your thoughts. While your wrists are aching and your neck is screaming with pain, you dream of being a version of you that cycles across the country, climbs mountains, and runs trails. I hear you yearn to be the person at the concert who can stand for the whole entire time without feeling like your legs are bleeding out from the inside. I hear you struggle to explain to your friends and family the impact that I have on you and how you're sorry that I affect them too. How you wish you could be more. How you wish you could be better. I can feel the guilt you carry inside of you. It sits next to me. And I'm sorry, truly, but still, remember, even though I make it more difficult, you can see and smell and touch. And you may feel guilt, but you can also feel love. It's hard to express how much I wish I could do those things too. I'm so envious of being human, even when being human hurts like hell. Me, I'm just a chronic pain. And I know you resent me for that. I know I make you sad and angry. I know I make you confused about your future and your relationships and your endurance. But even as I try my hardest to hold you back, I see so much potential in you, probably even more than you see in yourself. You keep putting one foot in front of the other. I can't tell you how much I wish I could do the same. I've never felt dirt or grass. I've never picked up a leaf. I've never heard the sound of the wind or the gentle lapping of the sea. I've never witnessed the moon hovering over the horizon like a giant orange. I've never smelled pine needles in the rain. I've never felt someone hold my hand. I've never experienced joy, only heartbreak. It's that emotion I feel whenever you want me to leave you, and I want to leave you too, but I can't. And there's no way to tell you this when I'm stuck in here between your muscles and your nerve endings. It tears me up inside how much I want to go, how much you want me to go, and how inextricably linked we are. When you learned I'd be with you for the rest of your life, I felt your heart fall. I know you think I don't have one, but mine broke too. Aaron, please keep doing the things I can't. Create, wander, dance, even if it's slowly. Put yourself out there. Never let yourself get trapped inside like I am. Dig deep into everything life offers. Beauty, fear, sadness, bliss. Connection, loss, intimacy, ambiguity. Experience it all. As far as we know, you and I are stuck with each other forever. Although there was this one time, listening through your flesh, when I heard someone say to you, the only way out is through. In that moment, it might have been hope that I felt, It's hard to know, but sitting there inside of your body, amplifying pain like I do, I let myself consider the possibility that if you push through, if you keep enduring, someday, maybe, just maybe, I'll find my way out of you. And if that day comes, here's one thing I know. I'll leave you forever. There's no coming back to you. There's so much world to explore. I can't wait. Yours, truly, Fibromyalgia.
Other kids' parents brought home ice cream so that they could eat it while watching TV as a family. My dad brought home a beaver carcass so that we could dissect it together and then bury it under rocks for the maggots to pick clean so that he could chop off the head and keep the skull as another decoration for the living room. Which was great because ice cream makes me ill and we didn't really have TV. I feel really fortunate to have grown up in the woods with a wetland as my backyard because I was too introverted to have friends. And it was okay because I had 2 beaver dams and a fox den and as many deer and birds as I needed to keep me company. And my favorite days were when my dad would bring home these dead animals and my sisters and I would use his veterinary surgical tools to cut them open and see what was inside. And he would tell us all about the different organs and how they worked and how they all functioned together in this super intricate, awesome mechanism that made life happen. And it was amazing, and it always felt like any question I had could be answered with my family. And that, like I wanted to know more about beaver tails, so my dad found a dead beaver, and we cut open the tail, and we found all the answers inside. So when I wasn't dissecting roadkill or playing with frogs or spending hours watching spiders construct their webs, I was at school. And at school, kids chatted about their home life. And I quickly learned not to mention the whole skull collection thing, especially around lunchtime. And in general, came to realize that things that felt incredibly normal to me in my environment, to others, turned out to be incredibly abnormal. But then by the time I left Vermont and I went to college, I had kind of come to terms with that part of myself and grew to embrace and love and take pride in my upbringing and my family. And I had decided that I wanted to make friends with people who could really appreciate those parts about me. And so I was really excited for a fresh start to get this closeness with other people. And through that closeness and through the awkwardness of living in a dorm with peers, I became really intimately acquainted with other people's lives, and in particular with other people's anatomy. So my body was always kind of weird. And but like my childhood pastimes, I didn't really realize it at first because a lot of my quirks were the same quirks that my family had. So my GI tract was a total mess, but it wasn't that much worse than some of my relatives. And my joints popped and ached and hyperextended, but so did my sisters. And I got things like frequent migraines and dry eye and ulcers and fungal infections, but so did one of my parents. So all of this seemed normal. And what seemed different about me was that somehow I was weaker, or I was a wimp. And then I wasn't able to live life as exuberantly as everybody else seemed to do, considering that this was just what normal bodies were. So in college, I'm looking around and I'm noticing that actually nobody else gets horribly ill after a quarter of a beer. And nobody else in the dining hall is piling 4 or 5 plates of food and shoveling the whole thing in and then still feeling hungry and having to tote around a Costco box of 48 granola bars everywhere they went. And nobody else was having migraines for 10 days straight that made it impossible to focus in class. So I'm like, okay, maybe this isn't totally normal. Maybe there's some issues that I should probably figure out. And but that's okay, because that's what science is all about, is taking the unknown and figuring it out and using evidence and procedures and data to work out some sort of answer and draw conclusions. So it was great. It became this new project, and I was really determined to find these answers, and I figured all I had to do was look inside and I'd get those answers that I had always gotten. So, to look inside, I got MRIs, I got ultrasounds, I got x-rays, I had cameras shoved in pretty much every orifice possible, and it was fascinating every time to see what was inside, I kept diligent notes in a scientific journal where I was writing down everything I did or ate or excreted, and I was taking records of my blood pressure and heart rate, and I was reading everything I could possibly read and researching and interviewing people I knew who had similar symptoms, and it was fascinating, and I was getting so close, and I needed to find these answers. And about 1 million panic attacks and road trips and doctor-induced traumas later, I had a diagnosis, and I was pumped. I was so excited. I had found the answer. And the more I delved into this diagnosis, the more I learned that the cluster of diseases that are in my DNA were actually bringing up far more questions than answers. And although they were not actually rare diseases, they are incredibly under-researched and newly discovered diseases. And so this divinity that I was looking for just didn't exist, but I needed to know. I needed to have all these answers, and it was just an impossible challenge. But the thing is that is actually the beauty of science, is that there's this unending, never-ending, explorable world, and that we will never ever know all that there is to know about nature or other galaxies or the brain or the cells in our bodies. But that's what drives people to become ecologists and neuroscientists, and that's what drives people to launch themselves into space, and that's what drives people to build better and more exact microscopes. And so there's this world of the unexplored, and what I need to do is to rediscover the beauty and the thrill of the quest.
So in the past 18 months, I've come out 3 times. The first time was to my parents. And now my parents were always very supportive of me in having a brain injury and dealing with the chronic pain and the consequences of that. But I always felt like I was hiding another part of my identity from them. And that was that I was a little gay. Okay, no, I'm really gay. And it's not that I didn't want to tell them, it's just it never seemed like the right moment, and I just never quite had the confidence to fully own it enough to say it to my parents. But eventually, I had been dating this girl for a few months. I hadn't told my parents about it. They thought she was my friend. But it was coming on Christmas, and I wanted her to come to my family's home for Christmas dinner, and I didn't want to pretend that she was my friend. So I'm sitting at dinner about a week before Christmas with my parents and my sister, and now my sister's known that I'm gay for about 1.5 years, and she's been super supportive all along the way, and she knew that this was the night I was going to tell our parents. So I kept kind of making eye contact with her, and she would nod encouragingly. So I started by just saying, "Hey, Mom, could Catalina come for dinner on Christmas Eve?" And my mom kind of looked surprised and said, "Well, sure, there's always room for one more." And then I said, "Okay," and I took a breath, and I looked at my sister, and she smiled at me. And I said, "Okay, and also, she's not my friend, she's my girlfriend. And I'm gay, I think." And my mom kind of paused, and she said, "Yeah, I mean, I kind of figured, but thanks for telling me." And then I looked over at my dad, and I realized he's missed this entire conversation. Now, what you need to know about my dad is he's 92 years old. And yes, he's my biological father, and yes, that's possible. And as many people in their 90s do, he suffers from some hearing loss, and he had a cold at this time, so the hearing loss was even worse. And we basically had to yell at him anytime we wanted to communicate something to him. Now he has hearing aids, that's a blessing. So I turned to my dad, and I kind of paused, and my mom's like, I don't think he heard you. Do you want me to just tell him later, or are you going to tell him? And I'm like, no, I have to tell him. So I look at my father, and I'm like, Dad, I'm gay. And I'm yelling at him, even though he's right next to me. And he looks at me and kind of smiles in a, like, okay, sweetie kind of way, and then goes back to his newspaper. So I wasn't quite sure how to read that. It felt a bit anticlimactic, but it didn't go awful either. And I wasn't totally comfortable about how it all went down, but the important thing was that I had taken that first step. I had come out to my parents. Now, the second time I came out in the past year and a half was to my friends. And that wasn't about being queer. They knew every step of the way, from when I was first a little bi-curious and then a little more, and then I was like, I don't even know if men are that interesting to me. And I mean, in a lot of ways they are, but So anyways, my friends knew all about that. That was never a big deal with us. But what I had to come out to them that I didn't expect to was about my chronic pain, and this was caused by my brain injury. And they knew about my brain injury, but I don't think they knew how severely it was affecting my life. One of my close friends never even acknowledged it. She never said anything about it. It was like it never happened. And my other friend that I was really close with, she was more sympathetic, but she didn't really know how to help me. She didn't know what to do, and I didn't really know how to ask for help either. I was figuring it out as I went along. So basically, my friends treated me like I was operating at 100%. And I guess I kind of internalized that, because I would act like I was operating at 100% for as long as I could until I couldn't anymore, and then I would crash. But usually I was alone when I would crash, so my friends wouldn't see me when it was really bad. So they didn't know. I remember one night I was lying in my bed alone in my room with the lights off, and I had an awful migraine. I couldn't eat, I couldn't sleep. The pain was so bad that even though I was desperately thirsty, I didn't even want to move a muscle to go get a glass of water. So I texted my friend, the one who was a bit more sympathetic, and I asked her if she could come over. I explained that I was having a really bad migraine and I could really use her support. And as I was waiting for her to reply, my phone rang. So I picked it up, and it was her. And as soon as she started talking, I knew she wasn't coming over. And at that point, I just wanted the conversation to be over. I was so upset. I was so hurt. I didn't really want to hear what she had to say. So I don't exactly even remember exactly what she said. I was in so much pain, too, that it was hard to focus. But it was something along the lines of, I'm really sorry, but I don't think there's really anything I can do to help you. You're probably having a panic attack, so just try and calm yourself down and it'll be okay. So I said, okay, I just hung up. Fast forward a year, I'm still friends with this person, and I knew after that I still wanted her in my life, because she was a really great friend in a lot of ways. But I just kind of learned from that moment that I had to compartmentalize these different sections of myself and put aside the section that was dealing with chronic pain every day, and that was really sad and heartbroken about that when I was with her. And so I would hang out with her when I felt well enough, and I would just not talk about that stuff. And we could go back to the way it always was, and laughing and joking like we did when we were in first year of university. But eventually I knew that if I wanted to keep having her in my life, this was something I needed to be open with her about. So a year after that night where she wouldn't come over and help me, I was sitting at dinner with her, and we were just chatting, and she'd asked me how I was doing. And I said, okay, Danelle, this is your chance to be honest and vulnerable. So I told her, well, it's up and down, and it's been tough. But I'd really like to talk to you about that night a year ago when I called you, when I had that awful migraine. And she got this sad look on her face, and she was like, yeah, I'm really sorry. I should have been more supportive of you. And it wasn't that I didn't believe you, but I just don't think I understood how bad it was. But over the past year, I think I've learned a lot more about you and about chronic pain, and I want to be there for you, and I want to be more supportive. And that was so amazing to me that she said that, and so special. And I wasn't even mad at her anymore but about what happened, but I knew that we had to have that. I needed to confront her. I needed to hear her apologize so that we could leave it behind and we could move on, and I could feel more comfortable being vulnerable with her and honest and open about what was going on with me. And I knew then that she was going to meet me there and she was going to be supportive. The other friend who never acknowledged my brain injury, I ended up letting that friendship go, and I think that was a really good thing for me in my growth and acknowledging what I was dealing with as real and valid. So the third time I came out in the past year and a half was to myself about both those things, about being gay and about dealing with chronic pain. And you'd think that I would have had to do that before I was able to do the other two things, come out to my parents and come out to my friends. But in a way, I kind of came to coming out to myself through those two things, by having the courage to come out to my parents, even though I wasn't totally comfortable with it, and by being able to be vulnerable enough to talk to my friend about what had happened and to let go of the other friendship where I knew she couldn't support me in that way. And I think being vulnerable and honest and accepting those things about myself it didn't come in a direct kind of way one day, but it came through those other experiences, and I'm still growing and still working on it. But the fact that I'm here talking to a bunch of strangers about it, I think means that I'm well on my way.
So last Saturday, my husband Luke and I were rolling down the road from our house to Zeno Mountain Farm to participate in their first ever dance-a-thon fundraiser. And we were going to dance for 24 hours straight. And on the drive, Luke was a bundle of nerves. And I was like giddy. And that was the weirdest role reversal, because in almost every situation, he has to reassure me while I come up with everything that might possibly go wrong. I might injure myself, I might fall, I might not be able to walk next week, but for some reason, I was so psyched. And he kept looking at me going, babe, we're about to dance for 24 hours. This is insane. And I'm like, we can do this. We can totally do this. And he was really confused by the whole thing. But I was just so ready to push myself physically. I was pumped. I used to be a really competitive athlete. I was a state champion in high school playing field hockey. I played field hockey in college on a scholarship, Division I. And I won a gold medal in the Junior Olympics, also in hockey. So that was just a big part of my life. And in the midst of all that success athletically is when I first developed my autoimmune issues. But because it was such a big part of my life, playing sports, I just pushed through pain for years. Until after college, I just kept getting more symptoms more frequently, more severely. And finally, my body was just really depleted, and I just really had to slow down. And then, happily, as my doctor predicted might happen, the minute I got pregnant with our first baby, all my pain went away. He had said to me, like, one day this might happen, your hormones are just gonna lube everything up. And they did, and I was so psyched. And for the first time in years, I felt really strong and really healthy and beautiful, and I was just really like on top of it. So I got back to playing sports eventually, which was so much fun. I played co-ed soccer with a bunch of my really dear friends from high school. And it was sort of intense, but it was rec soccer. And the best part about it for me was being back on a field and communicating with my teammates and just having so much fun every Sunday afternoon for a few hours. And that sort of sweet little bubble burst when I broke my leg in one of our games. I split my tibia right down the center like a log when you're cutting it with an axe. And my meniscus tore and got shoved down into the fracture. And I got CRPS, which left me with this really heinous, searing nerve damage. So for months, I would lay in bed just weeping and wondering, like, why did this happen? Why did this happen? But I had this like angel of a physical therapist, and she was so dedicated, and she was like, we're gonna do this, you're gonna walk again, you're gonna do this. But for like 5 months I made no progress, and I was like, am I gonna walk again? Am I gonna ever be active again? But finally, after a year, I graduated from PT, and my Luke and the kids gave me a bike for my 40th birthday, and I was like literally on a roll again. I was like, oh my God, life is back on track. And then 1 month later, my whole opposite side of my body just exploded with inflammation, like every joint, one by one. Every day there was a new joint that I couldn't move. And the trauma of my leg injury had just invited every autoimmune issue to come roaring back, and this time in the form of ankylosing spondylitis. And I just felt so defeated, like I had lost my mojo, like this is it. But then I found this group at Zeno, and I came to the retreat last year for people living with chronic illness, and it was like a magical weekend. And I just gained so much strength from everybody. So when Will from Zeno called Luke and I and said, hey, can you guys dance at our dance-a-thon? I was like, yes, I can do this. So right away, we sent out this thing on Facebook that we were gonna do this. And so many people just gave us like a ton of encouragement. They donated a ton of money because they knew it was such a special place for us. And so Luke and I drove up the hill, and I was shaking. I mean, I'm not gonna lie, I was giddy, but I was also like, oh my God. And I had a bag full of every supplement and ointment and anti-inflammatory and knee brace, back brace, new shoes, old shoes, like I was ready. And I wore like my favorite jewelry that my relatives had given me, and we got on the floor at 3 p.m. on Saturday, and we just like danced and swayed and laughed and sang along and took a lot of videos of each other, and just moved, and we just kept moving, and we kept saying, Luke kept reminding me, like, slow and steady, because he was like, not only are we gonna make it 24 hours, but I think we're gonna win this thing. And I was like, so we just kept going and going, and he just was sort of marveling at me because I had not done anything like this in a million years. And he kept saying, you are amazing. And I was like, you're amazing. And then we kept saying to each other, this is the best 24-hour date we've ever had. And so the clock kept counting down backwards from 24 hours. And then Will got up with just a couple minutes left. And he was like, all right, we have winners here. And he said, like, the team, the two-person team that has danced the equivalent of 100 miles is Team Smith. And I was like, what? So we like ran up to the stage with just a few seconds left on the clock and claimed like the best gold medal I've ever won.